Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sensei Podcast. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kevin Croce from Brigham and Women's Hospital, where he directs the program of complex and CTO intervention. He's been one of the pioneers in the area of complex PCI, taught many courses, and one of the best teachers all around. So, Kevin, welcome again, and thanks for being part of the podcast.
Thanks, Manos. I'm really excited to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation.
And Kevin, you've done a lot of things and you've taught a lot of things, but we always like to go back to the beginnings. Did you always want to become the complex PCI person? What actually made you decide to follow this pathway?
Yeah, it's really funny how life can take a serendipitous turn. I've been in practice about 4 years at the Brigham, and we didn't really have a CTO program. And so, I think the program directors realized that there is a need to up our game in terms of the available expertise in CTO and complex PCI. And sort of, Tabor was starting and some of the more senior people had other things that they were involved with. And, at that point I was serviceable. I could do left main PCIs, and they sort of realized I was a young person that had an appetite and didn't have an aversion for doing hard things. So they looked at me one day and were like, hey, we need a CTO PCI program. Would you be willing to start it and lead it? And it's really funny, Manos. I had no idea what CTO PCI was at that standpoint. I'm like, yeah, sure. It sounds like it'd be cool. And then I started a long journey of figuring out A, what it was, B, how to learn it, and then C, how to get good at it. And so, I think the story really goes like, hey, we need someone to do this. There's a warm body. We'll pick him. And so it's the way that it kind of came about. It wasn't like I had a burning passion because I really wasn't familiar with all the cool stuff we get to do and the real amazing benefit we have for patients in learning these techniques. But, I couldn't be more happy that it went down that way many years later.
And you say it was some serendipity, but, from the invitation to the point of becoming an expert in doing this, that was quite some time and effort, I'm sure. So how did that process go? How did you actually become, the great operator and be able to handle all these complexities?
Yeah, so, little by little, I started to read about what CTO PCI was. There were some nice review papers. The hybrid algorithm was probably about 2 or 3, maybe 4 years mature at that point. And then I think, through partnership with industry, I really appreciated. I got sent to a couple CTO PCI courses. The first one I went to was in Torrance, California at Mike Wyman's lab. I spent 2 days there learning from experts, seeing what was possible. And so that was my entree in terms of, the first time I'd actually gone to a live course, and I've gone to many since then. And it's kind of fun to be full circle. I'm actually asked to speak at them now. So it's neat how from a career progression, you go from knowing nothing about it and then really learning, getting involved with it, meeting colleagues, getting to be proficient and being able to teach other people how to do it. I think that's one of the professional joys of having been involved in this space over the years that I have been.
And you're now doing it and teaching it. But if you had to take the skills of CTO PCI, what have you found to be the most difficult thing to teach to people who are less familiar with the area?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources now on the cognitive aspects. And the cognitive aspects shouldn't be underplayed. There's a lot to nuanced high-level CTO PCI. But one of the things that I think we need to work on as a field are teaching people the manual aspects of actually executing stuff. And so I realize as I teach our fellows, I probably pay a little bit more attention to what my hands are doing and what I want their hands to do to be able to execute the stuff that cognitively they know should be done. But, it may be a little bit tough to learn. I mean, the first time you knuckle wire, you've never done that before. And some of the more nuanced maneuvers we do in terms of what our hands are doing connected to our mind to execute anything in the CTO PCI algorithms is something that I've been working on as a teacher to try to get better at. And as you know, even in the courses that we're faculty on together, we've worked hard, at least for moderately complex PCI, to develop hands-on models where we can sort of teach people the skill set, not just cognitively, but also from a manual dexterity standpoint.
Perfect. And obviously, you've been a big proponent of this, and you've worked on working your way. And although CTO is the topic of most courses, bifurcation is becoming rapidly one of those areas. Mm-hmm. And those, as you said, those models have been very invaluable to actually understand what the process is by doing that. And I think also there's the visible hard lab that you can see the same things.
Yep.
Now, how do you prepare for these cases right now? With all the experience you have, do you do anything special? Do you look at the angiogram? Do you feel nervous? How does the process go for you these days?
Yeah, age helps with many things. The first year and a half I was on call, I knew every night I'd think about it all day. And then I'd sort of, be worrying about it a couple of days ahead of time. Now I show up in the lab, my name's on the board, I don't even know. And I think for me, CTO PCI has been a similar journey. If I had a retrograde case coming up a day or so from now, I would have a long time ago been thinking about it, been a little bit more stressed about it. Because for me, that was the skill set I was probably last to get decent at. And so now, it's come a long way. If I have a really heinous case the following day, I recognize it maybe the night before. I don't really anticipate it as much as I used to. And that's because as you become more versed in a topic, I think the stress around being able to do these cases really goes down substantially. So we've started a CHIP fellowship about 3 or 4 years ago, and are really lucky to have complex PCI fellows that we work day in and day out with. And so our case preparation is, really focused on letting them have a chance to assess the case and decide what they would want to do first. And so a lot of times my case preparation is reacting to the case preparation that our CHIP fellow did. Like, hey, the big joke is I ask them to scope it out. Would you scope out this case? We're going to do it next Wednesday. And so, our current fellow, Mo, is great. He's like, okay, I scoped it. And he just lists, this is what I see, this is what the problem is, and this is what our plan is. And I'll often review that with our CHIP fellows and say, okay, I see it the same way. I see it a little bit differently. And then we'll look at the angiogram. I think much as you've been a pioneer for advocating for a decent amount of time before the case to make sure that we sort of have all of our, nuanced assessment of collateral opportunities, potential difficulties, et cetera. But as you well know, many of the people that refer patients to us aren't well versed in CTO PCI evaluating angiography. And so a lot of times you can't tell what you want to do in the case because the angiograms that you're sent as a way to entree the person to you really aren't going to be well done enough for what you need to see in a case. So a lot of times we're like, I guess we're going to have to take a better set of angiograms to help us decide what's possible from a CTO PCI standpoint.
Are there any cases that have stuck to memory from the many you've done that you think they have taught you the most, and what were those lessons?
Yeah, I think, I like you try to bucket things in terms of an organized fashion in my mind. And so the topics which I've learned a lot from are when I think something is impossible, and I sort of make a judgment of, I can't do this, but I'm going to try. I don't think I'm going to spend much time on it, and it works. I'm like, holy cow, we just learned something. This is possible. And also things like complication avoidance, what I would do differently in terms of, not getting into trouble. I mean, one example is, we often will look at a failed vein graft, which is osteal occluded, and make a judgment of whether it can be used as a conduit to do a retrograde CTO PCI. And a lot for several years, I sort of tried to poke at these things gingerly, not gotten into the occluded vein graft, and went on to do the case another way. But in a few scenarios, it really was the only option to do the case safely. And, sort of a cup occluded osteal vein graft. In recent memory, I've kind of like, all right, I don't think this is going to work, but let me just take an Estado, board in, drive a turnpike spiral in, and see if a polymer jacketed wire can get down to the CTO. I'm like, holy cow, it worked. It actually worked. So, I continually learning what is a waste of time and what potentially is an opportunity that's reasonable. And so, probably last year I did a couple cases where I thought the vein graft would give me no ability to get retrograde, and it actually did, despite my preconceived notion that it was going to be a useless endeavor. From complication avoidance, the times, at least introspectively, I've got into trouble are in relatively high stakes situations where the patients don't have a lot of other options. And I'll make a decision to move forward. I'll say to our fellow, this next maneuver is dangerous. I often joke around and say, don't try this at home. Knowing that what I'm going to do out of necessity has a risk-benefit profile, which is on the margin. And sometimes that risk-benefit assessment you make goes wrong. But at least I can lick my wounds in those cases and say, I think, it was worth trying because the patient had no other option. The patient pretty much, it comes to the top of my mind is I wasn't really sure where my wire was. I advanced the microcatheter and caused a huge perforation in a patient whose option was either LVAD or I opened her blind LED CTO. I caused a huge perf, had to tap her, crashed her on the ECMO, and she actually survived. But, I said to the fellow, I don't want you to think this is the right thing to do. This patient has no other option. And I actually made a mistake in that case that, caused a complication, but luckily we got her back from it. And I think, thinking back about why I did something that led to a complication, what my mental calculus was, what my execution was, or things that I'm always introspective about. So I learned from, what's possible that I didn't think was possible, and what I shouldn't do differently, or at least if I did something that led to a complication, was the calculus of risk-benefit accurate in my mind.
Thanks, Kevin. And as you said, you worked and now you're doing the live cases and commenting on the live cases. How useful do you find the live cases, both of those aspects you mentioned, to tell you what you can do that may not seem possible, and also for avoiding bad things happening?
Yeah, so I think understanding real-time troubleshooting in the cadence of how expert operators go through the process of seeing a problem, assessing what maneuvers are available to fix it, and then applying those. I find that super helpful in live cases. The other thing that live cases help me to understand is, I'm always probably my own worst self-critic. So I'm slow. This took me too long. Why can't I wire this vessel? It makes me feel a little bit better when I see expert colleagues, many of whom have mentored and taught me, who I look at as, the luminaries in our field, also have some of the same struggles. And so for me, live cases teaches me things like case efficiency, what people are doing better, faster, more proficiently than I am. But also, sometimes I'm kind of hard on myself and I see, all right, this is a hard field and people that are really good at this struggle also. So it teaches, it keeps us humble, certainly. But it also allows you to be like, hey, I'm sort of doing things similarly. And it gives me at least a second check of where I am on the learning curve and on growth progression with colleagues. Because if people are doing it way better than I am, that's something I should aspire to do. And similarly, if people are doing it in a way which is kind of not that different and it's considered to be state of the art, because usually those are the people we choose to do live cases, it makes me feel like, all right, I'm in a place where I can teach and can mentor our fellows, and my learning curve's at a place where I should be comfortable, even though I'm always striving to get better. It allows me some external calibration to how I'm doing and what my growth opportunities are. But I think, the real cool part about live cases is that in seeing the real-time cadence of algorithmic decision-making applied to a tough problem, I find a lot of value for that. And I think for adult learners, it really is valuable. You have to have a cognitive base of what the space is, what the algorithms are, and how to actually apply executable maneuvers to CTO PCI to be able to get a lot out of live cases. Like if you're a new CTO PCI operator, going and see a live case that you or Lombardi might do at CTO Plus is like drinking from a fire hose. If you don't have a background in it, I think you get less out of it. So that's where reading and studying and sort of off time, I think, has value. And then the live cases help it come together.
And then, do you ever feel that you reach a plateau? Do you feel that you reach a plateau, you're learning of CTO, you still your things to learn? How do you handle that aspect?
Yeah, I know. When we run at 15% failure rates as a field and complication rates of 3 to 5%, we're not at a plateau. I think I'm always looking for ways to get better, and I think we should be as a field. The innovation in this space has been a little bit slow to come in the past several years because it's getting relatively mature. And both the techniques and the devices have come a long way. But, even as new as this year, our buddy Bill Nicholson is going to have a new ADR device coming out, which I think is going to be transformative in terms of improving the efficiency and success of ADR. And so there are new things that we're all learning. You have lots of cool publications in various journals about, things like Power Carlino and Power Base and things that, we're all learning to apply. So it may be less light year jump ahead compared to, say, the original hybrid algorithm, but there are bits of innovation every year that help keep it fresh and help us to get better at what we do.
And then when it comes to you teaching your CTO fellow, the CIP fellow, do you have some specific criteria? Like if they want to come and train with you, what should they say to impress you so you can hire them?
Yeah, I don't know if impressed is the right word, but one of the things that really matters to me more than anything is that I love to work with colleagues that have a really good emotional intelligence, right? They're good people. They treat our staff well. They're fun to work with. They understand people. They understand patients. They're calm in a stressful environment. That's probably the most important thing. And I think someone who doesn't have aversion to some amount of risk, because these cases obviously are harder than just doing simple non-STEMIs day in and day out, and then that they have an organized approach to things. CTO PCI is relatively complicated. There's a lot of cognitive material and sort of cognitive understanding of what can be done to troubleshoot. And if you have that in an organized fashion in your head, it just makes it much easier to go down the list. All right, this isn't working. What's next? What's next? What's next? And so someone who's fun, nice, hardworking, is good to their colleagues and their patients, who is okay with being uncomfortable as a way to grow, who also has an organized approach to things. That would sort of make for the perfect complex PCI fellow in my mind. And that they smile a lot, because we struggle in these cases, and being able to keep a light attitude and a good attitude toward it is something which I think is important.
And then how much is the talent important, like having the good hands and be able to grasp the wire manipulations, microcatheter? How big part does this play?
A lot of that can be taught. At least in my experience as being a mentor of fellows, the fellows that probably don't have the whole skill set to do CTO PCIs are ones that tended to be not organized in their thought process. A lot of the manual stuff you can learn, and everybody has a different learning curve, but really, the ability, CTO PCI is hard, right? You see an input on the screen, you're assimilating what your team's doing, what the hemodynamics are doing, what your catheters are doing, what the patient's doing. And then you have all this troubleshooting to do, at which point you have a menu of things you have to choose from that you have to execute. That's a pretty complex problem. The nice thing about it is, at least in our lifetime, I don't think that's something that AI is going to be able to obsolesce you or me with. They still probably need a CTO PCI operator to do a CTO PCI, because it's a really difficult thing to do. But people that aren't able to read all of those inputs, assimilate what the problem is, understand what the troubleshooting is, and then choose something to execute. Those 4 steps aren't an available skill set for every PCI operator. And I don't have a really good way to vet fellows. We've been lucky with our CHIP fellows that by recommendations from people like you and colleagues that know them as interventional fellows, we've had amazing CHIP fellows. But how do I really find people that have that skill set is not something I'm a master at yet. We've only had a CHIP fellowship for 4 years now, but it's something I think about as a mentor. How do we get people that we know are going to be successful, and help coach people that don't have that entire broad skill set to maybe do something that's a little more suited to what they're good at? And I think as we think about mentors, matching a mentee with a job they can be successful at and really thrive at is an important part of how we coach them.
Perfect. Again, you've done a phenomenal job training them. And I think there's some self-selection, as you said. People who want to do this, for the most part, they probably have the drive and the motivation to go through another year of training after having completed essentially of their training. So there's some self-selection there.
Now, when you like as a CHIP fellowship director, if a young person's going to spend a year of their life and defer income and move their family to Boston to spend time with us, that's a huge responsibility. It's like having children. And so at least within our program, we work really hard to make a high quality educational experience where they're spending a year of their life for a good reason. I'll ask them at the end of the year, was it worth 12 months of your life to spend with us? And I want an honest answer from them, because if it wasn't, I got to do something better to make the fellowship more akin to what they need.
Perfect. And now, I know you've done a lot of new devices. You have an animal lab, you do research, you do the training, you do the teaching, the cases. So it's a lot of things to juggle. But from all these things, which one excites you the most right now?
I think executing a really hard case that you worry might not be able to be done still has a tremendous adrenaline rush for me. A, because it shows growth for me personally. And B, you're usually helping a patient to get better. That's still, that has not lost its newness in any way. Number two, I think, is mentoring fellows. They're kind of like watching your kids grow up. To spend a year with a CHIP fellow and then see them go and in their second month, execute a retrograde PCI and send you a picture afterwards with a smiley face is something I'm really proud about. Because, at least for me, it drives tremendous professional satisfaction to help someone else get good at something that you're passionate about. But also, I can treat one patient at a time at the Brigham Women's Hospital, a couple CTOs, 2 or 3 a day, and just sort of do my thing, stay in my lane. But our fellows that we train end up being like little missionaries, right? They go out, they make their program better. They bring new skill sets to the programs they come to, and they end up treating 2 or 3 patients a day in their center. So the snowball effect of having fellows learn something that's hard and go to various places and really impart new skill set and new patient care capacity to your region is something that I really get excited about. And I love to hear back from our fellows, which we do a lot. And we establish, and you spend a lot of time with our CHIP fellows and even with our interventional fellows during the time they're with us. So to hear back from them, which I do, often is really, really a joy of what we get to do, at least for me, from a professional satisfaction standpoint. And it's exciting.
No, absolutely. And then, as you said, to be able to do all this, there's a lot of demands on your, physical abilities, staying up, mental capacity. How do you always, keep? I always remember you every meeting, every case, always upbeat, and you're happy and you're positively inspiring other people. So, what is the secret there? How do you keep that positive energy and attitude?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is don't choose something in life to do with a profession you don't like. Like if you don't like it, it's going to be painful regardless. So I love what we do, and that allows me to keep a good energy. I think, balance is also important. I've got a wife who I'm very proud of that runs a big veterinary practice and 2 college-age boys. And so, to the fact that what we get to do professionally should be at the exclusion of other things that are important, like family, is something that I try to keep balance of. And if I don't have that balance, I introspectively get a little more grumpy in my approach to stuff. And so, where I work is great. I get a relatively flexible schedule. I'll really work hard for a couple of weeks, but then we'll often have a way to, spend 2 or 3 days to go to a meeting or 3 or 4 days to go skiing with my family. And so for me, I get to organize my life in a way which I like. Really intense blocks of work with really intense time away that allows me to become refreshed and sort of charge batteries along something that's completely different. From a hobby standpoint or from a family time standpoint.
And then do you exercise? Do you do anything, journaling or anything to keep you inspired and positively engaged? Or
I do, yeah. So we have a home gym that my sons and I built as one of our COVID projects, which I use a lot. And then we like to ski and hike, and we have 2 fluffy golden retrievers that we walk multiple times per day, every day. So those are sort of the things, at least from a hobby standpoint, and a daily activity that we get out and do. I used to run like you do, but unfortunately, years of standing on lead, it hurts my back too much. And so I've gone on to Peloton, elliptical, and a weight workout instead, and I try to integrate that at least 4 times a week.
That sounds perfect. And then in terms of your other interests, do you have any favorite books or any favorite movies that you would recommend?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a dark side. I think my favorite movie to this day remains Pulp Fiction. When I say that, my wife always gives me a hard time, but it's a great movie. It's funny. My favorite book is probably Outliers from Malcolm Gladwell. It's a little bit dry, but I think, for me, the case studies he has of how people learn to become good at something they're passionate about, I found really interesting because, it really talks about practice as a way to hone a skill set, which is something that, in my life, I know has been important. It's also something I use to coach our fellows and our kids in terms of, how we mentor other people. And so it's not the most exciting book from a story standpoint, but at least from a real life, relatable, what makes us good and proud at whatever we decide to do, be it gardening, or having children and growing them up, or, cooking, how you become excellent at something is sort of what Outliers is a case study of. And sort of thinking about how to be a good parent, a good husband, a good CTO person, a good mentor, it at least informed a little bit of the approach one might take to be, thoughtful of aspiring for excellence in whatever you decide to be excellent in.
So what one might say is that, look, I mean, you are at Harvard. I mean, you're on the best place in the world academically, a lot of reputation, strong support, and that may help build a program. What would you advise to people who are at less well-known institutions, maybe less supported than you have? What would be your thoughts about building a complex program or any PCI program in less, rigorous environments?
Yeah, what I love about CTOPCI, and you and I have been part of conferences where sometimes I'll get asked to give a talk of how to become and stay relevant in interventional cardiology. And as part of that, I take my own experience, right? Who taught me CTOPCI? Bill Nicholson from York, PA, not an academic center. Mike Wyman from Torrance, California, not an academic center. Bill Lombardi from Bellingham, Washington, not an academic center. And you were the lone person at the West Texas VA who was in an academic environment. And so to say that you can't do CTOPCI unless you're in a big academic center, I believe that's not true, because the people that with you pushed the field for us were actually outside of the grain. And I think that's kind of cool, right? The rugged individualism and almost the irreverence to say we need to do something cool and better. Whereas if I tried to do that in the hallowed halls of Harvard Medical School as a junior guy, they'd probably tell me I was crazy. I really like the fact that the people that really pushed this field were not from the usual places. And I celebrate that and would say that if you have good EQ, can connect with people that are mentors, have a reasonable skill set that we outlined, a lot of desire, and I think the tenacity to go after it, you can do CTO PCI anywhere. And, there's a really nice community of physicians that are happy to support anybody who's a promising young or even older individual who's willing to try and do this, because the community is so supportive and so collaborative. So, I was lucky. Actually, some might say that being at Harvard Medical School in our program, which historically had been somewhat conservative, may have been a challenge as opposed to a positive thing, but we've come a long way since then. I think that's one of the things I'm proud of with our program.
Perfect. And speaking of which, what are the things that you are most proud of, both professionally and personally? The many things you've done and you're doing, what are the things that you feel the most proud of?
Yeah, I think, from a full life standpoint, my wife and kids and our family are the things that matter most to me. And that's always sort of been the guiding light of, where the focus of all energy should be. But, and within that, I get the joy of having them be wonderful and then getting a job that I really love. I think professionally, the things I'm most proud of are probably our fellows, especially our CHIP fellows who've gone on to really be really high functioning PCI operators at the centers they've gone to. And I think, starting a program, training them and watching them do well is really something that excites me. And I think I'll be able to look back on my career and feel like that's something I'm glad I did. And I'm glad it went well. In all of our interventional fellows, we've had a run. I've been here for over 10 years now of just wonderful fellows that have gone on to do neat things. Many of whom are on podiums now and are publishing great papers and are doing cool stuff in cardiology innovation. And so at the end of a career, I think I'll look back on that and sort of, the people you've trained are a mark of the difference you've made. Patients are important. I really love being able to make people better. The cool thing about it is the number of Christmas cards I got every year expanded dramatically after we started doing CTO PCI, because people, their chest pain went away and they had a life again. And so, the many, many patients we've helped is, I think, also something to be proud of.
Wonderful. What is next for you? And of all the things you've done, what are you most excited about next?
Yeah, so I think, I continue to do a large volume of PCIs at our place. And I don't really foresee the need to do that for the long term. I've got two really wonderful junior complex PCI and CTO partners, Aja and Brian, who are great. And so I'm happy, we spin a lot of referrals off to them. I love to co-scrub with them in cases, or at least come in and out to be able to collaborate. The environment of where I work is super important to me. And so part of the reason I've stayed at my hospital for as long as I have is I'm allowed to do exactly what I want, and I get to do it with people who I really appreciate and enjoy working with. And so what's next for me is, I think, trying to grow that further. As you mentioned, we have this research effort in large animal lab that I run, and there's a lot of really cool device innovation that goes on in that space. So even though my daily professional title and the scope of responsibility of what I do hasn't changed in 5 or 6 years, the science and the opportunity to train people and the fellows, that's always a process of renewal, which is what keeps me sort of fresh and invigorated to go to work every day. For me next, that's an important thing. I've been talking with friends like yourself that have a little bit of gray hair, and I have more than you do, obviously, about, what the next 10 years look like. I love what we do, but I don't want to be doing it when I'm 70. I have way too many hobbies. I would be unfulfilled if I wasn't an interventional cardiologist. And so I don't know what the next chapter is going to look like or what the time frame for me to get there will be. But I think, as I get into my mid 50s, which will be happening in the next 5 years or so, I'm looking very critically at what the process of transition looks like. And what I'm going to do next is something that I'm excited to face as a challenge. I've started to read some books about it and kind of think about what retirement will look like and where that might actually be. But at the end of the day, Brian and Azure are in a great place to keep doing what we as a team do. And so if I dropped off the face of the earth tomorrow, I know that the program would go on, the patients would get good care, and I'd have left something behind with them as stewards of it that I could be proud of for the long term.
Yeah, a very thoughtful approach, similar to your approach to PCI. Your approach to retirement is very thoughtful and well planned, as always.
It's something I'm actually excited about when I get there. I just have to decide when. That's the big question, right?
Absolutely. Well, don't get any ideas now. I think there's still a lot of time to work on. But to summarize, I think if someone came to you right now and asked you, give me your 2 to 3 most important tips and tricks for me to become a great operator like you are, what would you advise them to do?
Yeah, I think, infrastructure is a little bit important. You have to do it in a place where you have enough volume, the team supports you, and you're given the latitude to build a career like you like. If you're seeing E&M patients 3.5 days a week and have a day and a half of cath lab time, that's hard to really become proficient because you do need some amount of volume of cases to get up and grow on that learning curve that we often talk about. I think, a little bit of tenacity and, if you take a punch on the chin, you got to get back up and stay at it. And I think most of us have that because we've gone through medical training. And I think, one of the most critical things is, in my mind, the approach, right? Am I humble? Am I willing to learn? And, and what am I doing differently this year compared to what I was doing compared to what I was doing 2 years ago? And so consistent growth is something from a mindset standpoint that's important. I always, I went to Tufts Medical School, and on the door above the library, there's a statement that teach thyself to say, thou don't know, and thou shall learn. And so I think that's really important, to be humble and understand that there's stuff I'm pretty good at and there's stuff I need to get better at. And if someone thinks they have a different way of doing stuff, I tend to be all ears. I think the risk is, I'm great at this, I know what I'm doing, is really the wrong approach. And so for someone that wants to do this in a focused way, you need a little bit of infrastructure, a lot of energy, an approach that allows you to ask for help, get help, and continue to learn. That would be sort of what I would suggest is the best path forward. And there's lots of resources to do that. And we're happy to help as a community to plug people into those.
Wonderful. Well, Kevin, thanks again so much. These are, treasures of wisdom. I think really people need this kind of advice. This is not a magic wand. You have to work for it and be in a supportive environment or make it yourself. And as you said, sometimes the academics might be a little harder to grow these programs than the non-academics. But thank you again so much. Again, so grateful to talk with you and learn from you, and look forward to continuing the learning process.
Congrats for all you do in medical education, including this podcast. I mean, you've been a treasure in terms of helping us grow the space, man. So I'm excited to be invited to this, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Be well, Manus.
Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.